Welcome back, friends. It's Caleigh Bird. Hopefully you learned so much from part 1 video, mixing all those paint colors. And now get ready for part 2, where we are going to go step by step and create this sunflower painting together. If you do learn so much from these, please give me a thumbs up. Go ahead and leave me a comment down below and let me know how much you like this tutorial format. And make sure you are subscribed, ding the bell, and come back every single week for all the best fine art tutorials and art biz advice. As we start this sunflower painting, I want you to remember that one of the most important things with oil paint is not necessarily getting every single minute detail absolutely perfectly perfect. It's more about realizing the methods in which we can apply the paint and using those to our advantage. So here we're starting off in the sunflower seeds. It's a rough area, it's a dark area, and if you'll notice behind the seeds, it's actually dark. So even on the lighter spots of the seeds, there are dark areas behind it. So what we can do, because oil paint is such an amazing medium for building up texture and layer, is that we can go ahead and put in a lot of dark area and then bring in that lighter yellow and start to dab it on top. And when I say dab it, I literally mean just dab, dot, and let the paint sort of move on. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we're aiming our dots in the right direction. Right now they're going to be a little sporadic, but in a moment we're going to start aiming them towards the center. And that's what's going to give us our texture, is the dabs, the dots, and really having a textural effect to show texture in a painting. And I know that statement might sound a little redundant, but what I mean is that you can literally use oil paint as almost like a minute sculptural tool and build it in the way, create the flow in a way, create the elasticity, create the stiffness, create the softness. It's almost like a very small molding procedure that you're doing with your paintbrush. So when we want all of these little bits of seeds to be coming out at us and aim towards the center, that's literally what we're going to do. We're going to have a nice thick buildup of paint, a nice thick buildup of dabs, and we're going to slightly aim them in towards the center and build that up. Now we can go in and mix a bit more of this dynamic orange that splashes right across the center. It comes off a bit intense in the beginning, but that's just because we haven't quite kneaded it in and we haven't yet brought in the other layers. As I was saying, oil painting, one of the great things about it is that it is a buildup of layers, and you can go back and forth. You can put light on dark, you can put dark on light, you can build up layers and textures. You don't need to be afraid when you lay paint down if you've done something wrong. 9 times out of 10 you can go back in and correct it with whatever you've got going on, whether it comes to just pushing the paint around or just adding another layer on top, diluting what you've got going on, or emphasizing something else. So if you noticed how bright that red was when we first put it down, now that we've sort of diluted it by adding a few more textural layers, it's really starting to blend in there well. And what will happen is we'll bring that orange around. It will be in the petals, and it will even slightly be in the leaves, and what is going to happen is then it will feel more at home and a little bit less stark and bright. So we can see that the back of this sunflower has a little bit of leafage area that actually comes out slightly wider than where the petals are going to start. So we'll just sort of add that in gently, and then we are going to kick off with these petals. Now hopefully the reason why we did not draw in the petals initially will become quite clear, and that is because these petals are a bit of a free-flowing shape, and I did not want you to get too caught up in the teeny tiny detail of getting each petal exactly right as in the photograph. What we want to do is use our photograph as a very close reference, but we're actually going to be creating these petals as we go around just loosely with our hand. And the way we're going to do them is by just a few choice brush strokes. These are not going to be heavily blended because they do have those great crinkle lines between them where we've got the light and dark crinkling between those petals. So the way to get that effect is to follow the shape of the petal to follow it from one end to the other versus doing tiny strokes. We want to do nice long strokes from one end to the other. And then we're going to just basically wash, rinse, and repeat. Do that over and over again using a nice gradient as we go. Then we'll come back in the end with that little bit of orange we had mixed at the beginning just to round things out, and that'll make it really tie in with the center very nicely. Okay, let's go over that process again. So first we are going to take the darkest yellow tonal value that we had created before, and we are going to simply put in a few brush strokes starting from the center and working our way out. Then we will reach for our medium tonal yellow value, and we will use brush strokes in the same trajectory as the first one, using them lengthwise throughout the petals, and we will simply paint on that medium tone. And you want to slightly use the wet on wet blending method here. It does not need to be a strong blend because we do want to show a nice crease where the petals move away from the center area where the seeds are, but simply have a nice blend where the darkest tonal value starts to meet the medium tonal value, using the same trajectory and direction as before. And now for the very tips of these petals, we need to reach for our lightest yellow tonal value, and we'll go ahead and bring them in. Now if you notice on your photograph, they are not super harsh points. Some of them are a little rounded, some of them are slightly stuck together, bent over each other, what have you. So definitely feel free to make these look natural. Do not try to get super perfect or geometric. I'm letting some of my petals be quite sharp at the end, some of them a little bit rounded, some of them facing away, some of them towards, and anytime that one goes over the other, of course you want to create a little bit of shadow underneath, but we will create shadow using yet even another darker tonal value than the three that we have on here. And I'm hoping you did take my suggestion to heart as far as having your painting palette right next to your painting, because it will really make your life so much easier when you can see exactly what you're reaching for at just a mere glance. Once you've laid in all the petals evenly and as close to the image as you can, remember that the light is coming from the right side direction. So we're going to want to make the tips of the petals on the left side a little bit darker as they are bowing away from the light. And then we're also going to go ahead and add in a few extra little white highlights here and there just to dash things in, to really give those petals more of a 3D effect and to show off the highlights on the little ridges. Now is an excellent time to go ahead and add in that background atmosphere color. I decided to wait until after having done the sunflower itself because I thought that it would be much easier to go and dab around the petals after they were painted rather than just blanketing the entire back and then painting over it, which some artists do. There are many artists who decide to paint their background layer and let it dry completely and then go back in and paint their foreground, which is a completely legitimate way to do it. However, I tend to like a little bit more of the painterly look where the edges of my foreground slightly meet the edges of my background in such a way that they kind of nestle together rather than looking placed one on top of each other. It's just a bit of a preference, but that is the reason why we are adding in the background now, and then we will continue to add it in as we go on down. And think about the fact that your background is not just some obscure nether region. It is an actual inside of a room or a place or a situation or whatever you're painting. So go ahead and give it just a little bit of differentiation. As you can see, the bottom left has a little bit of shading to it, which makes sense because our left side of the petals were also shaded. So go ahead and make the background slightly shaded on one side and brighter on the other, just to create a sense of actual atmosphere and not just a blank space. So as we start laying in the green for the leaves, I want you to think about almost using the photograph as like a paint by numbers guide, except for there's no numbers, but you just want to kind of lay in and block in the various different tonal value within the leaf shapes. You don't need to worry about being super perfect or blending everything like crazy. We'll talk about that in a second, but just go ahead and knock in a lot of those bold colors. As you start filling in more and more of the tones, of course, your space will get tighter and you will have less of the canvas showing through, and that's when you can start blending a little bit. And we're going to go ahead and use the wet on wet method. So we're going to use our brush as we go to sort of blend things in a little bit. I'm going to show you a hyper blended leaf in a second and you're going to see the difference. So for now, let's do this the right way and let's just sort of lay in our colors nice and closely and slightly start to blend them in with the brush as we go. Once you've got the bigger shapes locked in, you can go ahead and start to do some of that detail work. I'm bringing in a really almost yellow, very bright yellow to come in and deal with a few of those highlights to give that a really nice crisp edge. Now remember, we had previously discussed the difference between wet on wet blending and keeping natural brush strokes and doing hyper blending with a dry on wet method. So for this leaf, I'm going to show you the difference. This, I'm going to do a hyper blended method. You can see I'm laying in my major tonal value chunks just as in the other one, but now I'm going over with a dry brush and just sort of dabbing things around and moving around the paint. And you're going to see how it makes it look kind of plasticky and almost too blended. It doesn't really look like a real leaf so much. So look at the difference between these two, and you can see that the one on the upper left is nice and textural and painterly and gives some dimension, and this one on the bottom just kind of looks flat and weird and too smooth. Leaves have texture and it's just too smooth. One of the other nice things about oil painting is that if you don't like what you did, you can literally just wipe it away with a rag. So I wiped away that overly blended leaf and I'm going to redo it so that it looks nice with the rest of the painting. And you're going to see that basically the beginning is the same block in colors, only I'm not trying to oversimplify things so much. I'm going to give it a little bit of dimension, and because I'm going to use my brush strokes, I'm going to be able to get in there and get a little bit more detail too, a little bit more lining of the leaf and a little bit more highlights. For the most part, oil painting, you will find, is just sort of a wash, rinse, and repeat. You will get your little techniques and methods down, and you will learn how to just apply them to one object or subject after another. You will find that the key to successful oil painting is patience. Obviously, this video has been sped up for informational purposes, but in reality, I probably spent around 15 minutes or so, maybe even 20 minutes on each leaf. And that is just what it takes to do a nice painting. I notice when I am teaching in person, most of the students that I have that tend to get frustrated with the quality of their work are the students who try to rush through things. And with acrylic or even watercolors, fast painting comes naturally, but with oil paint, it is a slow process. Each brush stroke matters. There is a lot of color mixing, and the reality is that objects do have a lot of detail, so the more you want to make them look realistic, the more detail you're going to give them, which is why we do brush strokes instead of hyper blending, because hyper blending makes everything look smooth and generalized rather than precise and exact. Now, as we move down to the bottle, you'll need to remember that glass is a very unique surface to paint because it is clear. Of course, we all know that a glass bottle is clear. However, due to where the glass concentrates, either on the bottom, around the edges, or just our perception of it, it creates darker and lighter tonal values. So not only do we have the highlights, but we have the visual compression of the glass, which really alters the shape. But the good news is that with a few well-placed strokes, it makes it look very realistic. When you're painting the stem, remember that you are seeing the stem through the blue glass bottle, so it will be slightly altered. The color green will be slightly bluer, and you are also seeing it refracting through the water. So make sure you pay attention to exactly where it does the visual bend, as far as almost looking like a breakage point when it hits the side of the glass. Take a really good look at your reference photo to make sure that you get that spot just right, because it can look a little confusing if you don't. Even though glass is a very unique surface, as we talked about, you're still going to lay in the paint just like anything else. Look for those large shapes of different tonal values and just lay them in thickly, and then we're going to go through and do a wet on wet blending again. This one you might make a little bit smoother than the leaves, just because glass is smoother than leaves, but again, I don't necessarily recommend doing the ultra smooth dry brush blending on this either. And of course, the thing with painting clear glass is that it is very affected by its environment and also affects the things within it. So obviously the blue background will affect the blue glass, and then the green, of course, we had to alter that slightly, the stem, because that was inside. And even the way the top of the water line sits within the glass affects the shading and tonal value slightly. So we just need to remember that when we're painting clear glass, the blue or whatever color that glass is going to be mixed quite often with whatever is surrounding it, simply because of the transparency of the object. While painting this glass, I decided that the only way I could accurately show the tablecloth that it's sitting on was to go ahead and add that in before actually completing the glass. That way I'm using the same exact colors on the tablecloth as within the glass, and I'm not going to wind up mixing or changing things lately. Now, I highly recommend not to worry about doing the stripes on this tablecloth for this painting. You are more than welcome to do it, but that is not what I'm going to do for my demonstration. I think it is way too much detail, and the fact that the lines have such a geometric form, I think it is very easy to mess up on one of your first paintings, and I feel like don't give it the hassle. And now that we have the tablecloth taken care of, we can bring that slightly into the bottle to help add to its transparency. You're not going to want a super harsh, stark line, because of course the glass will change things around, but just having a hint of that in the right area is going to really bring that bottle into the forefront and going to show the background through it. And when it comes time to paint in the shine, do not be afraid to go bold. That is one of the trademarks of an ultra shiny object such as metal or glass, is the fact that there is such a stark shine where the light hits it. I am literally going in with pure white on my paintbrush and dashing it in and letting it slightly mix with the blue to give it that super bright highlight pop. Once we have allowed our oil painting to dry for 2 full days, make sure it is completely dry. We're going to go back in with the wet on dry blending method with our scumbling brushes. You'll want to use some old frayed brushes or even a boar's head bristle for this, and we're going to go in and sort of punch up those highlights and lowlights. First, we'll go in with a little extra of that dark umber, and we'll kind of gently scumble and scratch it in. We'll give that a little bit more depth and dimension behind the bottle. And then we're going to go in with a brighter color, and we're going to scumble in some highlights on the leaves. You notice I'm even using my fingers a little bit to dab it in. Now that that lower base paint coat is dry, you can really do whatever you need to work it in there, smooth it out, use your fingers, dab around. Don't be shy, just get in there. Now, last but not least, I am actually going to go in with some actual paint on this tiny brush, and I'm going to punch up some of the highlights. So this is not quite white, but it is very, very, very light yellow, and I'm just going to kind of dab it around just to kind of bring out a little bit of pop, a little bit of shine, because there's nothing that makes dimension more visible than when something very light is next to something very dark. So as soon as you see that, it creates a nice edge. So even though I already have highlights all around this sunflower and on the petals and everything, I'm still going to go in with my brush and just kind of go over them, really punch them up. Some of the areas I might even go pure white. Congrats, you have officially finished your very first oil painting. I hope you feel that going through all of these different surfaces together has given you a greater understanding on how to portray various texture using only oil paint. The great artists say that they never stop learning, so definitely remember to continue to challenge yourself, painting new subjects, trying out new paints, and of course mixing new colors.
Want to learn even more about oil painting? Awesome, you are in luck because this video is actually just one part of my complete guide to oil painting series, which includes videos not only about the best paints, brushes, and supplies to stock in your own art studio, but detailed instruction on how to actually use all your supplies, as well as sharing my own personal painting techniques. You can actually watch this entire series completely for free, either on my Skillshare or here in this playlist right here, because I have got a wealth of oil painting knowledge to share with you. So if you did learn something today, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you're subscribed, hit the notification bell, and come back every single week for all the best fine art tutorials and art biz advice.